Clarice Starling ran through the cold, misty woods of Quantico, her breath heavy but steady. She was training at the FBI Academy, pushing herself to be the best. Suddenly, an instructor called her name. She wiped sweat from her forehead and hurried to the office of Jack Crawford, the head of the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit. Crawford was a serious man with tired eyes. He looked at her for a moment before speaking. "I have an assignment for you, Clarice. Something important." Clarice nodded, trying to hide her nerves. "What is it, sir?" He handed her a file. Inside were pictures of murdered women, their bodies horribly mutilated. "There's a serial killer out there. We call him Buffalo Bill. He kidnaps young women, keeps them for a few days, and then kills them. He skins parts of their bodies." Clarice felt a chill run down her spine. The images in the file were gruesome, but she kept her face calm. Crawford continued, "We have no solid leads, but there's someone who might help. Dr. Hannibal Lecter, a former psychiatrist. Brilliant but dangerous. He's also a cannibal and a murderer." Clarice had heard of Hannibal Lecter. Everyone had. He was a legend, a monster locked away in a high-security hospital. The thought of meeting him made her uneasy, but she wasn't going to show fear. Crawford leaned forward. "I want you to interview him. Try to get inside his head. Maybe he can give us something on Buffalo Bill." Clarice nodded. "I'll do it." She was soon on her way to the Baltimore State Hospital for the criminally insane. The facility was dark and cold, filled with the distant sounds of screaming. Dr. Chilton, the arrogant head of the hospital, met her at the entrance. "You're very brave," Chilton said, smirking. "Lecter is not like the others. He's sophisticated. But don't be fooled. He'll get inside your head if you let him." Clarice ignored Chilton's condescending tone and followed him down a long corridor. The deeper they went, the darker it became. The air smelled damp and stale. As she passed the cells of dangerous inmates, some of them whispered to her, some hissed. One man, Miggs, whispered something disgusting, making her stomach turn. Finally, they reached the last cell. There, standing perfectly still behind thick glass, was Hannibal Lecter. He was not what she expected. He didn't look like a monster. He was calm, almost polite. His posture was straight, his hands resting gently at his sides. When he saw her, he smiled. "Good morning," he said in a smooth, controlled voice. Clarice swallowed and stepped closer. "Dr. Lecter, my name is Clarice Starling. I'm with the FBI." He studied her for a long moment, his eyes sharp and intelligent. "Clarice Starling," he repeated slowly, tasting the sound of her name. "What an interesting name. Tell me, what do they want from me?" Clarice tried to stay composed. "We're studying serial killers. We want your help to understand them better." Lecter chuckled. "Oh, you're a clever one, aren't you? But I don't think that's the real reason you're here. Jack Crawford sent you, didn't he? You want to know about Buffalo Bill." Clarice felt exposed, but she held her ground. "Can you help us, Doctor?" Lecter leaned closer to the glass, lowering his voice. "I could, but what will you offer me in return?" Before she could respond, there was a sudden noise. Miggs, the disgusting inmate she had passed earlier, did something vile. Clarice flinched, disgusted and humiliated. She turned to leave, her hands shaking. But then, behind her, Lecter's voice called out, "Clarice!" She stopped. "Come back," Lecter said. "I don't enjoy rudeness. I'll help you." Clarice turned back to face him. His expression had changed. There was something almost protective in his voice. "Look deep inside yourself," Lecter said. "Seek out Miss Moffat." Clarice left, confused but determined. She followed the lead and found a storage unit that had been rented under a fake name. Inside, covered in dust and cobwebs, she found something horrifying, a human head, carefully preserved in a jar. This was a message. The head belonged to one of Lecter's former patients. Buffalo Bill was someone Lecter had known. Meanwhile, another woman was taken. Catherine Martin, the daughter of a senator, was driving home when she saw a man struggling with a heavy couch. She was kind and offered to help him load it into his van, but as soon as she stepped inside, he attacked her. The last thing she heard was the van door slamming shut. She woke up in darkness. Catherine screamed, banging on the walls, but the walls were cold and made of stone. She was in a deep pit, trapped. Above her, the man looked down. He was Buffalo Bill. He watched her with an eerie calmness. "It puts the lotion on its skin," he said, throwing down a bottle. Catherine sobbed, begging him to let her go. But he only smiled and walked away. Back at the FBI, Clarice returned to Lecter. She needed more answers, but Lecter wanted something in return, her past. "Quid pro quo, Clarice," he said. "I tell you things and you tell me things." Clarice hesitated, but she had no choice. She told him about her childhood, about how she once lived on a farm and woke up to the sound of screaming lambs. She saw them being slaughtered and tried to save one, but she couldn't. She ran away carrying the lamb in her arms, but no one helped her. The lamb was taken back, and its screams haunted her ever since. Lecter listened, fascinated. "You still wake up hearing them, don't you?" Clarice didn't answer, but the pain in her eyes was enough. In return, Lecter gave her a clue. Buffalo Bill was making a suit out of human skin. He wasn't just killing, he was trying to transform himself. Before she could get more information, Chilton interfered. He wanted the glory for himself. He tricked Lecter with a fake deal, promising him better treatment if he spoke directly to the senator. Lecter was moved to a grand cage inside a courthouse. The senator came, desperate for information about her daughter. Lecter played with her emotions, giving her fake names, enjoying his power. That night, Lecter made his escape. Using a hidden piece of metal, he unlocked his handcuffs. When the guards came to bring him food, he attacked. He bit one guard's face, tearing it apart. The other he killed brutally. When the police entered the room later, they found a guard lying on the floor, his face covered in blood. But when they lifted him onto a stretcher, the truth was revealed. It wasn't the guard. It was Lecter. He had cut off the face of one of the officers and worn it as a mask, fooling everyone. By the time they realized, he was already gone. But Clarice couldn't focus on Lecter now. She was close to finding Buffalo Bill. She followed the clues and found a connection. Buffalo Bill's first victim was someone he knew personally. He wasn't choosing at random. Clarice traced the victim's past and found an address. Without waiting for backup, she went to check it out. She knocked on the door of a quiet man named James Gum. He seemed nervous, twitchy. "Are you close to catching him?" he asked, smiling strangely. Then Clarice saw something, a moth flying in his house. Her blood turned cold. The same kind of moth had been found in the victims' mouths. She realized too late. James Gum was Buffalo Bill. He saw the change in her expression and ran. Clarice drew her gun and followed him down into the basement. The basement was a nightmare. She saw Catherine, still alive, trapped in the pit. Then the lights went out. Everything was dark. Clarice's breathing was heavy. She heard a soft clicking sound. Buffalo Bill had night vision goggles. He could see her, but she couldn't see him. He moved closer, reaching out, almost touching her. Then she heard it, the sound of him cocking his gun. Instinct took over. Clarice spun and fired. The gunshots echoed in the darkness. When the lights came back on, Buffalo Bill was dead. Catherine was safe. Days later, Clarice graduated from the FBI Academy. She had done it. But then she received a phone call. It was Lecter. "I have no plans to call on you, Clarice," he said, his voice smooth as ever. "The world is more interesting with you in it." She listened, her heart pounding. I do hope the lambs have stopped screaming, he said. Then he hung up. Clarice stood there, silent. The case was over, but Lecter was still out there, somewhere, watching.